Hi class, welcome to our Biochemistry Period 1 asynchronous lecture video wherein we will discuss all the special topics and also the topics that we were not able to discuss thoroughly for your Period 1. Ito po, this may serve as a tool for your upcoming periodic examination. The topics or the information that will be included here may or may not be included for the periodic examination. However, this will serve as a tool, and this may be helpful for your next subjects. So these are the topics to ponder in your biochemistry. These are the topics that are not included. Number 1, yung mga protein test kasi kasali sila sa laboratory proper. Nagkaroon tayo ng pahapyaw na discussion on your protein test, yung mga Buret test natin for Heller's test for period 1. However, we will discuss that thoroughly on your period 2. So, hindi po sila kasali sa lecture major examination. Number 2, yung mga history, may mga nabanggit na scientist, yung mga dates or years ng kanilang discoveries, hindi na po sila kasama. Kasi these are the topics that are included and must be given more focus to. Number 1 is your enzymology. Mahaba po si enzyme, so dapat aralin maigi. Next are your biomolecules. Sobrang dami nung mga topics underlying the biomolecules. Next are your lab math. Yung mga pKa, pH, water, si Henderson, Hasselbalch, kasali po yan. Next are your buffers, yung mga mechanism ng buffers inside our body. Mahaba yan, so dapat natin siyang pagtuunan ng pansin. Next are the parts and functions of the cell. Alam nyo na yan, pero dapat aralin nyo siya isa-isa. Okay? Next is the Krebs cycles and the pentose pathway. So, sit back and relax, and mahaba-haba pa po itong discussion natin. Let us start our discussion by discussing the first topic, which is about your enzymes or your enzymology. So what does your enzyme do? Ano ba talaga yung mga mechanism of action niya? When we say enzyme, yes, they are made of your proteins, but not all your enzymes are made of your proteins. Pag sinabing enzymes, these are special set of catalysts. Okay, they are biologic catalysts, and anything that has to do with the speeding up or accelerating the reaction inside your body involve ang enzymes doon. Okay? Also, they are responsible for regulating metabolic reaction rate. And when we say enzyme, we have several factors that affects the enzymatic activity in your body. Kasi sabi nga po natin ng ating enzymes, they have the optimum pH and temperature lang wherein they can do their work. Pag sumobra or nabawasan or sumobra sa baba, sumobra sa taas, it will surely affect the enzymatic activity. So, discuss natin siya isa-isa. We have your pH. Number 1 is the pH. It affects the activity of the enzyme but also affects the charge and shape of the substrate so that the substrate cannot bind to the active site or cannot be catalyzed to form a product. So for most mammalian enzymatic activity, usually dapat ang pH natin is around 7 to 8. Okay, most physiologic enzymatic activity works best around pH of 7. Okay, 7 is neutral. 8 parang pa-alkaline na siya. Okay, 7 to 8 lang po. But when it becomes too much acidic or too much alkaline, your proteins or your enzymes denatures. So the most physiologic reaction of your enzymes only happens at around pH of 7 to 8. Sabi nga po dito, kapag nagkaroon na masyadong malaking changes when it comes to the pH of your body, it will surely affect the charge and the shape of the substrate. Like what we've mentioned sa ating previous discussion, kapag nagkaroon ng changes in the shape and the charge of the substrate, malamang sa malamang hindi magkakaroon ng binding at hindi magkakaroon ng enzyme and substrate, and then hindi magkakaroon ng binding at hindi magkakaroon ng product at hindi magkakaroon ng fasten up or ng acceleration in the rate of your enzymatic activity. Okay, next is your temperature. We're done with the pH. Next is the temperature. At most mammalian enzymes, the pH works best at around 37 degrees Celsius. Okay, at optimum na po yun. And 60 to 65 degrees Celsius is the maximum temperature where your enzymes will be inactivated. Okay, kapag sumobra sa taas yung temperature ng katawan mo, parang kang nagkakaroon ng convulsion, masyado mataas yung lagnat, hindi na pababa using the paracetamol, it will surely affect your enzymes. Next is the substrate concentration. So matatandaan, meron tayong two major components for the enzyme. We have your enzymes, and then may active site ka dyan, and then meron kang substrate na kakabit. Okay, the substrate concentration, yes, it surely does affect the enzymatic activity in a way that the enzyme concentration, the higher the enzyme concentration, the faster the reaction. So mas marami yung enzyme concentration mo or your substrate concentration, mas mabilis yung reaction because more enzyme is present to bind with the substrate. Okay, yun din po yung sinasabi niya doon. Meanwhile, for the substrate concentration with the amount of enzyme exceeding the amount of substrate, the reaction rate steadily increases as more substrate is added. So, pareho lang ng mechanism si substrate concentration and enzyme concentration. The more the enzyme concentration, the more substrate concentration, mas mabilis. The more, the merrier. Parang ganun lang siya. So, next, ito naman, hindi na to nangyayari sa loob ng katawan natin. More on sa mga analytes na lang to na pinaprocess natin inside the laboratory. Yung mga storage, okay, the room temperature. Ito po yun. So for the storage of the blood or the serum that you will be subjecting into a test, dapat ang storage lang, ideal storage lang para ma-keep natin yung enzymes na itetest natin doon sa ating serum. It must be stored at around -20 degrees Celsius. It is the ideal temperature for preservation of the enzymes kapag ka longer period of time. Pag ilalagay mo siya sa ref for the longer period of time. But for the ideal for substrates and coenzymes at around 2 to 8 degrees Celsius lang po. And 22 degrees Celsius or your room temperature is ideal for the LDH, yung lactate dehydrogenase natin. So ito, para ito sa ating mga analytes to be subjected into a test inside the laboratory. Meanwhile, ito din naman, sila hemolysis. Pagka masyadong may mali doon sa process ng inyong phlebotomy, it will surely increase the enzyme concentration pag nagkaroon ng hemolysis doon sa kinunan yung dugo. As a medtech, meron kang patient na kinuhanan ng dugo, nagkaroon ng hemolysis, yes, it will affect the enzyme concentration and then yung enzymatic activity yun. Meron po siyang repercussions. Next, the latescence or the milky specimen, pag masyadong milky yung specimen, it will decrease the enzyme concentration. So, for the introduction of your enzymology, ito lang po muna siya. So next, yung mga theories natin for the enzyme substrate binding, we have two major components of your enzymatic activity. We have your substrate as well as your enzymes. And then yung enzymes, meron po siyang active site. So meron po tayong two theories with regards to the enzyme substrate binding. We have your number one, the lock and key model. Ano po ba sinasabi sa lock and key model? It says that the enzyme's active sites fits the substrate perfectly. Okay? Perfect for one another sila. Parang lock and key talaga. Okay? Next, when the enzyme approaches the substrate, there is already an initial perfect fit between the substrate and the enzyme's active site. Parang in layman's term, kada kaldero meron silang takip. Okay? Or yung kada susi, meron silang lock. Meron talaga silang pinto para destined sila for one another. Next, this explains why enzymes are specific when it comes to the substrate. Okay, meron po silang specificity. Specific lang si particular enzyme to particular substrate. If this enzyme is acting on a protein, any other molecule that isn't a protein, example yung mga carbohydrates natin, would not fit to the active site and therefore would not be acted upon by the enzyme. So, ang limitation natin dyan, it implies that enzymes are very rigid. One enzyme is equals to one substrate. Okay? So, next, ang next theory naman po natin when it comes to the enzyme substrate binding, this is what we call your induced fit model. So, para lang din po siyang lock and key model, modified lock and key model. However, initially, there is no perfect fit between the active site and the substrate. Ang nangyayari dyan, when the enzyme approaches the substrate, okay, lalapit si enzyme papunta kay substrate, the substrate induces a change in the active site, so complementarity will be achieved. So dito, parang in layman's term, ang sabi sa induced fit model, hindi man po sila fitted or hindi man sila destined to be katulad ni lock and key model, hindi man sila destined and fit na magsama sa isa't isa. Si substrate po ay nag-a-adjust. Okay? So initially, nakikita nyo dito, hindi talaga fit. Okay? Nag-a-adjust po sila. Nag-a-adjust po si substrate. When the enzyme approaches the substrate induces a change in the active site. So complementarity will be achieved. Okay? Ganun po yung kanyang mechanism. Nag-a-adjust siya. So next, these are the common major classes of your enzymes na pwede po natin gamitin at basahin. But ito lang yung mga kanilang general classifications of the enzyme. So ito sila in a longer version. But if you will classify your enzymes, ito sila. We have your 6 major classes. We have your oxidoreductase, the transferase, the hydrolase, the lyasase, the isomerase, and then the ligases. So kung paano yung mechanism of action nila when it comes to speeding up the reaction or yung kanilang rate of reaction, ito po siya. Kung babalikan natin, longer version siya. So basahin niyo na lang. But if you were going to classify it accordingly, ito sila. Okay, yung mga G6PD, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, under siya ng oxidoreductase. Pakikabisado niyo po yan. Okay? So next, this is the relationship between rate and substrate concentration in uncatalyzed reaction. We have 2. Number 1 is your zero order reaction and number 2 is your first order reaction. Sabi ko ba number 1? Number 1 is your zero order reaction. Number 2 is the first order reaction. So ano po bang sinasabi nito? Pakitandaan po ng maigi. Sa zero order reaction, even if we increase the reactant reaction, the reaction rate stays the same. It does not change. It is constant. Next, the reaction rate is independent on the reactant concentration. Even if there are a lot of reactants, the reaction rate remains constant. So, ibig sabihin nito, the reaction rate depends only on enzyme concentration. Hindi nga po daw siya nagbabago. So, zero order reaction siya. Okay, ito yung relationship ng rate and substrate concentration. Pag first order reaction naman siya, let us just read the description. Even if we increase the reactant concentration, there is a constant corresponding increase in the reaction rate. Pakitandaan, direct proportional relationship between the reactant concentration and the reaction rate. So mahilig magtanong si Ma'am Trina ng ganito sa examination, yung mga relationship of each organism or yung kanilang mga relationship ng ating mga dinidiscuss. The reaction rate is dependent on the reactant concentration. The more the reactants, the faster the reaction rate. So ang sabi naman sa first order reaction, parang directly proportional yung reaction rate doon sa substrate concentration. Yun po yung pinagkaiba ni first order reaction and the zero order reaction.